Imagine dedicating 22 years of your existence to a relationship only to discover you are viewed as nothing more than an unpaid servant. Visualize undergoing a major medical operation on your spine, and instead of receiving care, you are ordered to host a massive family gathering for your spouse's relatives just days after returning home. This is the exact reality that a woman named Sarah found herself dealing with. However, rather than breaking down or shedding tears, she executed a flawless plan of strategic retaliation. She used a hidden property deed and a highly detailed spreadsheet to completely dismantle her husband's entitled worldview. This is a story about a woman who reached her absolute limit, stood her ground, and reclaimed her life. For over 2 decades, Sarah believed she was building a genuine partnership with her husband, Mark. They shared a house, raised children, and created a life together. But beneath the surface of their marriage lay a deeply unfair dynamic. Mark viewed Sarah's domestic contributions not as acts of love, but as baseline expectations. He assumed that cooking, cleaning, managing the household, and organizing family logistics were simply her natural duties. Sarah managed all of this while also maintaining her own career, balancing the intense demands of her job with the never-ending tasks of running a home. She frequently felt exhausted, but she kept going, hoping that her efforts would eventually be recognized and appreciated. The turning point arrived during a routine medical checkup. Sarah had been experiencing severe, shooting pains down her back for months, which she had quietly dismissed as simple exhaustion. The doctor's diagnosis was much more serious. She had a severe spinal issue that required immediate surgical intervention. The medical team made it clear that her recovery would be a long, fragile process. She would need total rest, absolutely no heavy lifting, and complete freedom from physical stress for several weeks following the operation. When she shared this stressful news with Mark, his initial reaction was not one of worry for her health, but rather annoyance about how her temporary absence would disrupt his personal comfort. To make matters worse, the scheduled date for Sarah's major spinal surgery was set for just one single week before the annual Miller family reunion. For more than 10 years, this massive event had been hosted at their house. It was a chaotic gathering of over 30 people, featuring Mark's extended relatives, distant cousins, and demanding in-laws. Every single year, the immense burden of organizing, cleaning, grocery shopping, and cooking for this massive crowd fell entirely on Sarah's shoulders. Mark would simply socialize on the back deck, drinking beverages with his brothers while taking all the credit for being a fantastic host. Sarah assumed that, given her critical medical situation, Mark would automatically cancel the reunion or move it to someone else's house. She brought the topic up one evening while trying to manage her pain. Mark looked up from his phone with an expression of pure annoyance. He told her that canceling the event was out of the question because the family looked forward to it all year long. When she reminded him that she would literally be recovering from spinal surgery, he waved his hand dismissively. He said she was exaggerating the situation and that she could simply sit in a chair and direct people on what to do while he handled the rest. It was in that specific moment that something vital snapped inside Sarah. The sheer lack of empathy from her husband acted as a sudden wake-up call. She realized with absolute clarity that Mark did not view her as a human being with physical limitations or feelings. He viewed her as a utility. He saw her as a machine that kept his life running smoothly. She realized that if she agreed to his plan, she would severely damage her body and her health, all to maintain his comfort and social standing. She nodded quietly, pretending to agree to his terms, but her mind was already spinning with a different plan. Sarah possessed a secret advantage that Mark frequently forgot about. She was the sole legal owner of their childhood home. Her parents had passed away a few years prior, leaving the property entirely to her. Because the home was a direct inheritance, it remained her separate property and was not legally considered a marital asset. Mark had always viewed the property as a minor financial safety net, but Sarah saw it as something else entirely. It was a tangible piece of independence. The property required some long-delayed structural renovations, particularly regarding the plumbing and flooring, which would make the entire living space completely unlivable during the process. The following morning, after Mark left for his office, Sarah contacted a local contractor who had previously provided an estimate for the home renovations. She asked if they could begin the extensive work on the exact week of the scheduled family reunion. The contractor confirmed they had an open slot and could start immediately. Sarah paid the deposit right away and signed the contract. The agreement explicitly stated that due to the nature of the structural work, the water would be shut off and the house would be legally classified as a construction zone, meaning no one could reside there. With the construction legally scheduled, Sarah turned her attention to the financial and domestic reality of her marriage. For the past 22 years, she had kept meticulous records of their household expenses, receipts, and chore allocations out of a habit for organization. She opened up a secure spreadsheet and began compiling a comprehensive data sheet. She calculated the market value of 22 years of cooking, deep cleaning, laundry, event planning, and property management based on professional local rates. The final number was absolutely staggering, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars of uncompensated labor. Sarah then organized the spreadsheet into clear, undeniable categories. She documented every single family reunion from the past decade, listing the exact amount she spent on groceries out of her personal account, the hours she spent preparing meals, and the post-event cleanup tasks she completed alone. She attached digital copies of receipts and bank statements to back up every single claim. This document was not just a list of complaints, it was an irrefutable, data-driven financial ledger of her invisible contributions to the marriage. A few days later, the invitations for the family reunion were sent out by Mark via a group text to his entire extended family. He proudly announced that the event was officially on and promised everyone a wonderful weekend filled with home-cooked meals and relaxation. Sarah watched the notifications light up her phone, but she remained completely silent. She did not correct him, nor did she remind him of her upcoming surgery. She simply let him enjoy his false sense of control while she prepared her final moves. The day of Sarah's spinal surgery arrived swiftly. Mark drove her to the medical facility, though he spent the entire car ride complaining about the heavy morning traffic and how the early schedule disrupted his morning routine. When the medical staff took Sarah back to the preparation room, Mark stated he was going to wait in the cafeteria to work on his laptop. The operation took several hours, and it was completely successful, though the medical team reiterated that her recovery period required absolute stillness and zero physical exertion. When Sarah woke up in the recovery room, she felt a profound sense of physical vulnerability, but an equally powerful sense of mental clarity. Mark entered the room briefly, holding a coffee cup, and asked the nurse how quickly Sarah could be discharged. He explained that he needed to get back to his routine and start organizing the house for the relatives arriving in just a few days. The nurse gave him a stern look, explaining that Sarah needed to be handled with extreme care and could not participate in any household activities whatsoever. Upon returning to the house, Sarah immediately went to the ground floor guest room, which she had prepared in advance so she wouldn't have to climb the stairs. Mark helped her bring in her small bag, but immediately retreated to the kitchen. Within an hour, Sarah could hear him loudly opening cabinets and slamming refrigerator doors. He walked into her room, looking frustrated, and demanded to know why the pantry wasn't stocked with the massive amounts of food required for the 30 visiting relatives. Sarah looked up calmly from her pillows and told him that she had been unable to go grocery shopping due to being in the hospital. She reminded him that she was on strict bed rest. Mark huffed, stating that she should have ordered the groceries online beforehand so they would be ready. He complained that he now had to spend his evening driving to the supermarket and asked her to write down a complete list of everything needed for the weekend meals. Instead of writing a grocery list, Sarah reached for her laptop, which was sitting on the nightstand next to her. She opened the email draft she had prepared and hit send. The email was directed to Mark, with his immediate family members CC'd on the message. Attached to the email were two documents: the official legal notice from the construction contractor stating the house was an active, unlivable job site starting the next morning, and the massive spreadsheet detailing 22 years of uncompensated domestic labor. Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, laughing slightly, assuming it was a joke or a simple list. As he opened the attachments, Sarah watched his facial expression transform from irritation to complete shock, and then to pure rage. He stared at the legal document confirming that a construction crew would be arriving at 7 slow am the next day to shut off the water and rip up the flooring. He then scrolled through the endless rows of the spreadsheet, viewing the precise financial calculation of his wife's decades of service. He marched back into her room, his face red with anger, demanding to know what the meaning of this was. He shouted that his family was arriving in less than 48 hours and that she was ruining the entire weekend on purpose. Sarah responded in a quiet, measured voice that carried absolute authority. She explained that since he believed hosting a reunion required zero effort, he was fully capable of managing the situation himself at a hotel or a different venue. She noted that the house would be legally closed for renovations, and she would be staying elsewhere to ensure her recovery. Right on cue, a specialized medical transport vehicle that Sarah had arranged arrived in the driveway. Two professional medical transport workers entered the home with a comfortable gurney. They carefully assisted Sarah out of bed, ensuring her spine was completely protected, and prepared to transfer her to a private, quiet recovery suite she had rented near the rehabilitation center. Mark stood in the hallway, completely paralyzed with disbelief, as he realized he was being left entirely alone to face the consequences of his own arrogance. As the transport vehicle drove away, Mark's phone began ringing continuously. The emails and text messages had reached his mother, his brothers, and his cousins. They were all demanding to know why the venue was closed and where they were supposed to stay. Mark was suddenly forced to answer for the logistics he had ignored for over 10 years. He had no food, no usable house, no plan, and absolutely no support from the woman he had taken for granted for over 2 decades. Standing in the center of the quiet house, Mark stared down at the glowing screen of his smartphone, the device vibrating relentlessly against his palm as text notifications cascaded down the display. Group chat messages from his brothers, frantic calls from his mother, and confused emails from extended cousins flooded in simultaneously. For over a decade, the architectural complexity of this annual weekend had existed entirely outside his field of vision. It had simply manifested every single July with pristine execution. Now, the absolute weight of that structural reality crashed directly into him. The physical environment around him echoed with a sudden, unfamiliar vacancy, underscored by the faint smell of antiseptic from Sarah's brief return and the stark presence of the laminated legal warning now taped firmly to the glass panels of the front entryway. He took 2 steps toward the kitchen island, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the spreadsheet document once more, attempting to comprehend the overwhelming volume of economic data his wife had assembled over the past 22 years. The spreadsheet itself was an undeniable testament to precision. It was categorized with the icy detachment of an external corporate audit, containing columns that broke down 22 years of domestic infrastructure into stark, billable operational hours. There were separate line items for daily meal preparation, deep cleaning cycles, localized grocery procurement, administrative household management, and specialized event coordination, all calculated against standardized local commercial rates for professional domestic labor. To see his entire marriage translated into an uncompensated financial deficit left him completely disoriented. He scrolled through entries from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last month, each line accompanied by digital links to historical bank statements and out-of-pocket receipts that proved Sarah had consistently funded the domestic baseline from her individual career earnings while he treated his own income as private equity. The total sum at the bottom of the ledger ran deep into 6 figures, a monument of invisible labor that he could neither deny nor negotiate out of existence. Before he could process the sheer financial scale of the document, a sharp knock vibrated through the heavy oak structure of the front door. Mark hurried down the hallway, swinging the door open to find 3 construction workers dressed in heavy canvas overalls, utility belts, and protective eyewear. Behind them, idling loudly in the quiet suburban street, sat 2 massive commercial utility trucks loaded with industrial flooring sanders, replacement copper pipes, and rolls of heavy-duty protective plastic sheeting. The lead contractor, a stocky man with a clipboard held firmly under his arm, looked at Mark with a detached, professional gaze, tapping the laminated notice taped to the glass. He stated clearly that the property was officially under an active structural contract and per the legal safety mandates signed by the sole property title holder. The residential water main would be completely deactivated within 15 minutes to allow for the absolute extraction of the ground floor plumbing network. Mark attempted to interject, his voice rising in panic as he explained that 30 out-of-town guests were scheduled to arrive on the property in less than 48 hours. The contractor simply shook his head, completely unmoved by the domestic emergency, and pointed down to the bottom line of the authorization form, which bore Sarah's unmistakable, elegant signature dated weeks prior. He informed Mark that any cancellation or alteration of the operational timeline would result in a non-refundable forfeiture of a 5-figure deposit, and furthermore, due to the high-density particulate matter generated by the chemical floor strippers, the interior air quality would be legally toxic and unlivable for a minimum of 14 calendar days. With a brief nod to his crew, the contractor stepped past Mark, carrying heavy rolls of plastic film into the main living spaces and systematically taping down the entryways, effectively transforming the family home into a sealed industrial work zone. As the loud, rhythmic thud of mallets striking the old kitchen tile began to reverberate through the walls, Mark retreated to the back deck, his phone now ringing with a call from his mother Linda. Her voice came through the speaker loud and demanding, inquiring why she had just received an automated email notification containing a detailed spreadsheet and informal notice regarding the complete unavailability of the reunion venue. Mark struggled to find words, his usual confidence completely evaporating as he attempted to explain that the house was currently undergoing emergency structural overhaul. Linda cut him off instantly, completely outraged, noting that she and his father had already boarded their regional flight and expected to be picked up from the terminal in exactly 3 hours, with the full expectation that the annual family dinner would proceed as scheduled. Hang up the phone. Mark looked out across the pristine green expanse of the backyard lawn, the very space where he had spent the last 10 summers sitting in a comfortable canvas lawn chair, drinking cold beverages with his brothers while Sarah ran back and forth from the hot kitchen, carrying heavy trays of marinated meat, homemade side dishes, and fresh ice. He looked toward the corner of the deck, where the large stainless steel barbecue grill sat completely cold and covered in dust. He had always taken pride in his reputation as the ultimate family host, routinely accepting the loud praise of his relatives while completely ignoring the reality that every single component of their comfort was bought with the currency of his wife's profound physical exhaustion. For the first time in his adult life, he was forced to look at the blank space where Sarah's labor had always been. And he realized with absolute terror that he did not even know the name of the wholesale food distributor she utilized to source the reunion groceries, let alone how to operate the industrial kitchen appliances now sealed behind layers of commercial plastic film. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, the specialized medical transport vehicle arrived smoothly at the entrance of a quiet, private recovery pavilion situated adjacent to the local orthopedic rehabilitation complex. The environment was the exact polar opposite of the chaotic construction zone Mark was currently navigating. The air was utterly silent, filled with the faint, calming scent of lavender and the soft hum of centralized climate control. The two professional transport operators carefully manipulated the gurney, ensuring Sarah's lower spine remained perfectly aligned and free from any structural torque as they transferred her into a wide, single-story suite equipped with reinforced medical handrails, a state-of-the-art automated adjustment bed, and a large bay window overlooking a manicured courtyard garden. As the nurse systematically checked her vital signs and verified the administration schedule for her post-operative pain management medications, Sarah felt a profound physical release, a sudden, deep deceleration of her nervous system that had been wound tight for over 22 years. Sitting up slightly against the firm, supportive pillows of the recovery bed, Sarah looked out at the afternoon sun filtering through the leaves of the oak trees outside. For the first time since her diagnosis, the persistent, burning neural pain in her lower back felt like a manageable physical condition rather than a systemic symptom of her marital exploitation. She reached down to her nightstand, opening her laptop to review the automated delivery receipts for the emails she had sent just hours prior. Every single family member on the distribution list had successfully opened the documents. She knew exactly what kind of conversations were currently occurring across the various branches of the Miller family network: the sudden panic, the realization of their own complicity, and the complete collapse of the patriarchal facade Mark had maintained for over a decade. She felt no malice, no active desire for further conflict. She felt only the profound, immovable weight of an absolute boundary that had been cleanly and permanently established. Back at the house, the physical reality of the situation continued to deteriorate rapidly. The main water valve had been completely shut down, leaving the entire residential structure without sanitation or utility access. The loud, mechanical roar of an industrial tile saw cut through the humid afternoon air as the work crew systematically demolished the ground floor bathroom flooring. Mark sat on the steps of his front porch, surrounded by the physical artifacts of his own complete failure, his laptop open on his knees, an empty notebook page waiting for a grocery list he did not know how to compile, and his phone display showing 12 unread text messages from distant relatives demanding hotel recommendations that he could not afford to secure on such short notice. The absolute entitlement that had characterized his worldview for 22 years was completely useless in the face of a legally binding commercial contract and a cold, data-driven financial reality. He was completely alone, standing in the ruins of a domestic infrastructure he had spent a lifetime taking for granted. Finally realizing that the woman who had kept the entire machine running had walked away, taking the keys to his comfort along with her. The heavy doors of the medical transport vehicle shut with a firm, solid thud, cutting off the chaotic sounds of the suburban neighborhood and leaving Mark standing completely alone on the concrete driveway. Inside the vehicle, the soft hum of the engine provided a comforting contrast to the intense emotional storm that Sarah had just left behind in her wake. For the first time in over 2 decades, she felt a profound sense of physical separation from the house that had served as her luxurious prison for so long. As the vehicle navigated the quiet streets toward her private recovery suite, she closed her eyes, letting the professional medical staff monitor her vitals while her mind processed the massive shift that had just occurred. Back at the house, the atmosphere was rapidly dissolving into total panic. Mark stood paralyzed in the entryway, holding his phone as it vibrated continuously with incoming alerts. The group chat he had created to boast about the reunion was now overflowing with demands for immediate explanations. His mother wanted to know why Sarah was sent to a care facility. His brother was demanding to know why the guest rooms were completely unavailable, and his sister-in-law was furious about the sudden lack of organization. The legal letter from the renovation contractor was clear, leaving zero room for interpretation. The property was officially a dangerous construction zone, and anyone entering did so at their own legal risk. At exactly 7 o'clock the following morning, the harsh reality of Sarah's plan manifested on the quiet street. A fleet of large commercial trucks pulled up to the curb, and a team of workers carrying heavy tools stepped out onto the lawn. The project foreman knocked loudly on the front door, presenting Mark with the official work order that Sarah had signed and fully paid for. Within less than an hour, the main water supply to the entire house was turned off, and the loud, rhythmic sounds of crowbars tearing up the old hardwood flooring echoed through the neighborhood. The comfortable home Mark took for granted was instantly transformed into a dusty, noisy work site. Mark attempted to call Sarah multiple times, but his calls went directly to her voicemail, which had been updated with a polite message directing all household inquiries to the contractor and all emergency medical updates to her primary physician. Realizing he could not stay in a house without running water or usable floors, Mark was forced to do something he had never done in his entire adult life. He had to research, book, and pay for multiple hotel rooms using his personal bank account. The sudden realization of local hotel pricing during peak holiday season sent a shockwave through his personal finances. When the extended Miller family began arriving in town later that afternoon, they did not find a beautifully decorated home filled with fresh flowers and the welcoming aroma of home-cooked meals. Instead, they arrived at a chaotic construction scene filled with safety cones, discarded building materials, and the deafening noise of industrial power tools. Mark had to meet them at the curb, nervously explaining that they would all need to drive to a commercial hotel located 20 minutes away near the highway. The initial reaction from his relatives was not sympathy for Sarah's major surgery, but deep annoyance at the massive disruption to their vacation plans. At the hotel, the situation grew increasingly tense. Without Sarah there to manage the group, organize the daily schedule, and coordinate transportation, the family members quickly began arguing among themselves. Mark's mother complained endlessly about the quality of her double room, while his brothers openly questioned why Mark was incapable of managing his own household logistics. Every single meal required a complex group decision, resulting in massive restaurant bills that Mark was forced to pay entirely on his own credit card, as his relatives assumed he was covering the expenses as the host. Meanwhile, Sarah was experiencing an entirely different reality in her private recovery suite. The facility was quiet, peaceful, and staffed by attentive medical professionals who ensured she received her pain medication precisely on time. She spent her days resting her back, reading books she had put aside for years, and enjoying simple, balanced meals delivered directly to her bedside. She did not check the family group chat, nor did she respond to the angry text messages Mark sent late at night. For the first time in 22 years, her only responsibility was her own physical healing. By the third day of the disastrous family reunion, Mark was completely exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot from a lack of sleep, his credit card limits were dangerously close to being exceeded, and he was forced to spend hours doing basic laundry and carrying heavy luggage for his ungrateful relatives. As he sat in the hotel lobby surrounded by plastic cups and discarded food wrappers, he looked down at the digital spreadsheet Sarah had emailed him. For the very first time, the massive numbers and detailed categories began to make perfect sense to his tired mind. He realized that the seamless life he enjoyed was built entirely on the exhausting labor of a woman he had completely ignored. When the reunion finally concluded and the relatives departed with cold goodbyes, Mark returned to an empty, dusty house. The construction crew had finished the initial phase of the work, leaving the floors bare and the structure completely silent. He sat down on a single remaining chair in the middle of the empty living room, looking at the bare walls. He realized that Sarah had not just planned a temporary escape, she had structurally dismantled the unfair dynamic of their entire marriage, leaving him with a clear choice between real change or total isolation. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, geometric shadows across the subfloor where the premium oak planks had once been, Mark remained frozen in that lone chair. The absolute finality of the silence was deafening. For more than 2 decades, this exact house had been an absolute hive of domestic sound. The constant, comforting whir of the washing machine cleaning his shirts. The sharp cadence of a kitchen knife slicing vegetables on the cutting board, the pleasant background murmur of talk radio while Sarah dusted the ceiling fans. Now, the space felt entirely hollowed out, reduced to its bare stud walls and structural concrete. He dragged a hand down his face, feeling the rough stubble of 3 days of total neglect. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling past the dozens of passive-aggressive text messages from his brothers who were currently boarding their flights home, and opened his banking application. The financial damage was catastrophic. The hotel rooms, the high-end dining expectations, the emergency transportation logistics, and the continuous out-of-pocket costs had drained his auxiliary accounts to near zero. He was looking directly into the maw of financial vulnerability, and for the first time, he did not have Sarah's stable corporate salary buffering his life. 3 miles away, the quiet pavilion was bathing Sarah in a completely different kind of evening light. The automated medical bed adjusted with a nearly silent hum, raising her upper body just enough to view the manicured courtyard below, where a solitary fountain trickled water down slate steps. A physical therapist had visited earlier, guiding her through the very basic, highly deliberate movements required to prevent blood clots without placing any undue stress on her lumbar vertebrae. The burning, white-hot agony that had defined her existence before the operation had subsided into a dull, muscular ache, a productive discomfort that signified actual structural mending. She reached for her laptop, not with the frantic anxiety of a woman trying to manage a household crisis from afar, but with the cool precision of a software engineer examining a closed system. She reviewed the final confirmation documents from Buckeye Restoration. The subfloors had been completely cleared of ancient dampness, the hallway drywall repair was scheduled for prime setting tomorrow morning, and the house was tracking perfectly toward the clean, modern aesthetic she had visualized for years, but had continuously postponed to fund the extended family's summer comfort. She scrolled briefly down to her email inbox, where a single lengthy message from Mark's mother, Linda, sat unopened. Sarah paused, her finger hovering over the mousepad. In the past, an email from Linda would provoke an immediate, involuntary spike in her blood pressure. It would mean pages of coded critiques regarding the cleanliness of the guest bathrooms or the choice of morning coffee blends. Sarah clicked the message open. The tone was completely altered. The characteristic condescension had been completely replaced by a fractured, bewildered defensiveness. Linda wrote that the hotel stay had been entirely unmanageable, that Mark had seemed completely incompetent at organizing simple dinner reservations, and demanded to know why Sarah had kept the family in the dark about her medical status. Sarah read the paragraphs with an entirely detached sense of curiosity. She felt no compulsion to draft a lengthy defense, no desire to explain the mechanics of her spinal fusion, and absolutely no guilt. She closed the window, archived the message in a folder labeled Completed Property Matters, and shut down the laptop screen. The boundary remained perfectly intact. Back in the barren living room, Mark finally stood up, his joints popping in the unheated space. He walked into the kitchen, or what remained of it. The granite countertops were covered in a thick layer of fine gray construction dust, and the major appliances were entirely wrapped in industrial-grade protective vinyl. He reached out to turn the sink faucet out of pure habit, only to be met with the hollow metallic rattle of a completely dry pipe system. He let out a ragged sigh. He would have to drive to the local convenience store just to purchase a plastic gallon of drinking water and utilize a public restroom at a gas station down the road. The sheer logistical friction of basic human survival without a dedicated homemaker maintaining the infrastructure was entirely overwhelming. He walked back to the center of the house, his eyes tracking the dark outline on the floor where the old Persian rug had been removed. He realized that for 22 years, he had treated his marriage like an automated utility company. He flipped a switch. The lights came on, the food appeared, the clothes became clean, and he never once considered the human intelligence or the physical expenditure required to generate that power. He pulled up the digital spreadsheet on his phone one more time, zooming in on a highly specific tab labeled Miller Family Reunion Historical Accounting. Sarah had meticulously cross-referenced every single line item. There were columns for bulk poultry purchases, local bakery orders, rental chairs, industrial trash bags, and calculated hourly rates for post-event sanitation. Right next to the numbers, she had attached scanned copies of his own text messages from those exact dates. Messages where he wrote, "Make sure the beer is iced before the guys get here." Or "Don't forget my dad needs the firm pillows in the back room." Seeing his own casual arrogance preserved in digital ink next to the raw, uncompensated financial costs was like looking at a criminal indictment of his own character. He had genuinely believed he was a generous provider, completely blind to the fact that his wife was subsidizing his social prestige with her own private salary and physical health. The following morning, the construction crew returned exactly at 7 a.m., their heavy boots thudding against the plywood subfloor like a military cadence. Mark was forced to pack a single duffel bag with whatever wrinkled clothes he could locate and retreat to his vehicle. He sat in the driver's seat of his sedan, the engine idling as he watched the contractors carry heavy sheets of drywall through his front entryway. He had nowhere to go but his corporate office, a sterile environment where he would have to pretend everything was completely normal, while his personal life was fundamentally restructured by a woman resting in a medical facility 3 miles away. He placed his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the front steps where he had stood just days ago, ordering his post-operative wife to play host to 30 people. He finally understood that the woman who left that house in the medical transport vehicle was never coming back to the old arrangement. If he wanted a future with her, he would have to learn how to walk across the bare subfloors of their life and meet her as an equal partner, or remain entirely alone in the quiet house she owned. 2 weeks passed before Sarah finally authorized the medical transport team to bring her back to the property. Her recovery had progressed beautifully in the quiet sanctuary of the care facility, her spine healing cleanly without the dangerous interference of domestic labor. When the vehicle pulled into the driveway, the transformation was immediately striking. The commercial utility trucks were gone, and the heavy plastic sheets had been completely cleared away. Stepping through the front door, her feet met the smooth, flawless surface of the newly refinished oak floors. The old roof stain in the hallway was entirely gone, replaced by pristine, freshly painted drywall. But the most significant change wasn't the material renovation. It was the man waiting for her in the living room. Mark stood by the kitchen island, looking notably thinner, his usual air of unearned confidence completely replaced by a quiet, grounded humility. On the counter sat the printout of the 22-year domestic ledger. It was heavily annotated in Mark's own handwriting, showing where he had cross-referenced the numbers and finally accepted the staggering reality of his debt. Over the past 14 days, living out of a hotel and managing his demanding relatives entirely on his own, the absolute illusion of his entitlement had shattered. He had been forced to clean his own spaces, account for his own finances, and face the sharp, unvarnished criticism of a family that no longer had a buffer to exploit. "I reviewed every single line," Mark said, his voice dropping to a quiet, steady tone he had never used before. "I am so deeply sorry, Sarah. I didn't see it because I chose not to look. I don't expect you to forget what happened, but I want to spend the rest of our lives paying this back." Sarah looked at him calmly, leaning slightly against her supportive walking cane. She recognized the genuine weight of his realization, but her boundaries remained entirely unyielding. The old dynamic was permanently dead. The house belonged exclusively to her, and any future they built together would be established on a foundation of absolute financial equity, shared physical responsibility, and mutual human respect. Mark nodded in silent agreement, stepping forward to carefully take her light travel bag, fully aware that his performance as a partner would now be measured in daily action rather than empty assumptions. Sarah took a deep, painless breath, looking around the bright, renewed spaces of her childhood home, knowing she had finally reclaimed her life.